Bonjour, bonjour and bienvenue à tous. It is Thursday, and Thursday is Russell Kelly's curated series of the making and remaking of the great museums of Paris since 1900, presented by Alliance Française of Chicago and Alliance Française Miami Métro. We are two of over 100 chapters of Alliance Française across 45 states. We are lucky today to count on the support of the Fédération des Alliances Françaises of USA for communication and our very special sponsorship of Solange and Will Brown. My name is Patricia Bonnat. I am a board director of Alliance Française Miami Métro, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the last, unfortunately, of our 2026 series on the making and remaking of the Centre Pompidou. Our speaker today is Arthur Dayras. He's Chief of Staff to the Director of the Centre Pompidou National Museum of Modern Art. He will explain how and why the iconic building on the Plateau Beaubourg with its caterpillar escalator is undergoing a full remaking. Technical reminders, you know the routine. It is a Zoom webinar format. You are muted, you are invisible. You can use the chat line if you want to write to everyone or anyone, and use please the Q&A button to ask your question, and you should know that the talk is recorded. A few words about our curator extraordinaire, which I have known for more than 6 years, Russell Kelly. Russell has curated and moderated the past 5 winter lectures about our Histoire et Héritage de France. He has been a Parisien for over 30 years. He is also an author. Lion Press has published in 2021 his book with a long title, The Making of Paris, the story of how Paris evolved from a fishing village into the world's most beautiful city. A new book, Walking Through the Ages of Paris, 10 historical walking tours through the city of light, is due to be published this year. Now to you, Russell.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Arthur Dayras. And as Patricia said, Arthur is Chief of Staff to the Director of the Centre Pompidou. He previously worked as a publisher at the Museum of Modern Art and Contemporary Art at Saint-Étienne Métropole, and as assistant curator at the Dia Art Foundation in New York, which is where he perfected his excellent English, presumably. Arthur is also an author. His first novel, Que brûle la nuit, I'm not sure how to translate that. What is the night burning? Is there an English translation?
No, unfortunately not, but I was translating it to my English speaker friends as So Burns the Night.
Oh, that's much better. Que brûle la nuit, So Burns the Night. Was published by Édition Robert Laffont in 2024, and Arthur has a second novel in the works. But first, today, he will tell us all about the making and remaking of the Centre Pompidou. So, à vous, Arthur.
Good morning to all in the US and good afternoon to the one who are also following from Europe and from France. So yes, indeed, today I'm going to speak about the history of the Centre Pompidou, coming back to its roots and also the early years or even the early decades and centuries that have previously led to the creation of the Centre Pompidou that opened in 1977, and see also and speak about also the transformations that occurred in our institution and also in the museum that is part of this institution during the 50 years of our current life, and having a word on what is our closing time during these 5 years of construction and what will be our next decades. So let's see if you all see my presentation that you should see right now. So let's begin with the history of the Centre Pompidou and a few words of history. Some of them might have been to the institution, others might have not join our institution before the closing. And the Centre Pompidou is at the very crossing of two main neighborhoods in the very center of the Centre Pompidou on the right bank. And it's almost at the open door of what we call the Marais, so the swamp. And the swamp was a neighborhood that is very historical, that is still very historical, because it was protected houses that were that were formerly some mansions by the dukes and the the royalness during the Middle Age, before becoming workshops during the 18th and the 19th, and being transformed by the main transformation of Paris in the early Second Empire, of what you might know as the Baron Haussmann reconstruction of Paris in the mid 19th. So the Centre Pompidou has taken its location on what was a former car park, used for almost 30 years, and that car park was a very, very large place. And the institution was considered to be the very first institutional presidential museum by the Centre Pompidou, by Georges Pompidou. Georges Pompidou, as you might know, is the second president of our Fifth Republic. And Georges Pompidou was an art lover. He was a fierce and a very a passionate lover of contemporary art, of design as well. He was going to galleries with his wife, and both of them were collectors. And he decided to launch this idea of having an institution that was somehow multidisciplinary, that was not only a museum, but that was considered to be a center of living information. So a museum, but not only a museum, a place for dance, theater, for lecture, for readings, and we will see that these different components are making our identity at the Centre Pompidou. The Centre Pompidou was there. Indeed, there was a public international contest that was launched in 1971, and that contest was very, very popular all around the world. So it brought almost 700 entries from French architectures, but also from the US. The US list of architecture studio was quite massive, and the two selected, or the two winners, were Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, which at that time were quite unknown. They were very young, and as you can see, some of them were still wearing a hippie bird. I think it was Richard Rogers in the middle of the photograph. And they were selected for a building that was conceived as almost a factory, but also as an hut with all its organs and its tubes within the middle of Paris. So you can see the space that then hosted the Centre Pompidou. And one of the very first sketches or drawings that is also just behind me, that was prepared by Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano. So as you can see, we have a building that is composed of 7 different floors, also some sub floors that were supposed to host some parkings. At that time, the importance of car was very, very higher than today in Paris. And what is also striking on in this drawing is that the very famous escalator lift that we have outside our facade on the piazza wasn't conceived as it is today. And we'll see the transformation that will lead to the current building. What also was interesting is that they were conceiving the facade as a gigantic screen that were supposed to host some screenings, some documentaries, some works by artists. So they were already at that time in the early 70s thinking of the evolution of mediums in terms of art. So right now we have another view of their sketches, and you can see that that what was thought to be a multidisciplinary institution by our former president Pompidou was at the very heart of the project by Piano and Rogers. So they were the building they imagined were all transparent, or was supposed to be all transparent, so you could cross from one street to another, to the piazza, by the building. And obviously it was an idea that were somehow not possible for security reasons, even in 1977 when we opened. And the building itself was having presence of art at almost every levels or every floors of the Centre Pompidou. The piazza itself, which is very popular today and which hosts musicians, passerby, and people sleeping as well, as a very common place of life, was at that time also invested with different formats, with some stairs to watch a performance or to watch a theater, or some different mediums. And you can see like the ability to screen some projections, which I think was very, very imaginative in the 1970s. So let's have a word on what led us to the construction and what a gigantic project it was. So you can see that the park site was highly transformed, and we used to call that place the Hall, just like the Châtelet Les Halles project, which was at that time also a big project of transformation. And for this specific building, Piano and Rogers also imagine a new form of structures. So I'm not an architecture specialist, but I know that they have designed some of the knots that are really famous today, especially to somehow balance the weight of the institution itself. These are some models of the institutions, with the very first idea of a lift that was somehow across different from the floors, and that led also to be changed in the coming years. And that is quite interesting because the Centre Pompidou project really evolved from 1973, when Piano and Rogers were selected, till the opening. It changed because of the Pompidou wishes, even though Georges Pompidou died in 1975, if I'm correct. It changed because of the architects themselves and because of the political forces. So there were strong debates on the use of the floors, on the colors themselves. There was a battle of colors, and we are hosting a little exhibition on that specific subject at the Maison Pompidou, which is a small location that we open and that will be opening during the closing, on the history of the Centre Pompidou itself. And right at the background of the first picture on the left, you can see a wall painting by François Morellet, a very famous French artist of minimalism and abstract art. And François Morellet was involved in the thinking of the colors and has somehow conducted to the different thinking of the colors. And Piano and Rogers, at the very first moments of our institution, were thinking of having the main colors of the Centre Pompidou as yellowish. And if some of you have been to the Wimbledon house that were conceived by Richard Rogers for his parents a few years before the Centre Pompidou, some of the colors that were somehow applied to the Centre Pompidou were the very first used on that structure. So there were strong debates, and finally only 4 different colors were chosen on the history of the Centre Pompidou. We can see that the project evolved, and we are now approaching to what led us to that continuity lift that is somehow very important in our identity. In 1977 was the inauguration of the of the Pompidou Center by the President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. And the building itself was hosted, different exhibition. It hosted a permanent collection, and I will have a few words on it afterwards. But it also hosted, my bad. I'm mixing a bit my IDs. It hosted, let's have a word on what led us to the institution. So the institution opened in 1997, and it was a permanent place for the Musée National d'Art Moderne. And the Musée National d'Art Moderne pre-existed or had a former history before being settling in the Centre Pompidou. So to understand, and we can go back to the to a view of the Centre Pompidou. The Centre Pompidou is hosting different institutions. It hosts a museum, which is the Musée National d'Art Moderne, but it also hosts the public library, the Bibliothèque Publique d'Information. It also hosts a contemporary and experimental center on music, which is called DIRCAM, and which is on the Stravinsky Place, and host the Département de la Culture and Creation. So 5 different programming institution within one building. And that's what is very important to understand about the Centre Pompidou. The Centre Pompidou is not only a museum, but a place where you're going to see exhibitions, collections, but also theater, movies, documentaries, where you can join the institution and have and read and be informed on the news. So it's a very live center of information, as Georges Pompidou used to think about it. So let's also have a small understanding of what is the Musée National d'Art Moderne. So the Musée National d'Art Moderne is our national modern and contemporary art collection, and it was inherited from 2 different timings, or two different eras. The very first one being the collection of the Musée du Luxembourg, and right on the left you can see some different paintings that have joined the collection today. And more important, in 1932 was created the Musée des Écoles Étrangères, and that specific museum was at that time at the Jeu de Paume. If you've been to the Jeu de Paume is no photographic institution, and at that time in the early 1930s it was hosting the Musée des Écoles Étrangères, meaning that it was a museum and its collection was mostly open on the international movement and the international creation. In 1943, during the occupation, and that's quite a troubling history for us, the Musée National d'Art Moderne was created. And at the very first, it wasn't, obviously not at the Centre Pompidou, because the Centre Pompidou wasn't created, but it was at the Palais de Tokyo. And that's an interesting story as well, because the Palais de Tokyo was and still is a country art center, and at that time it was hosting also a collection, so the national collection. You can see here some of the collection that are still today some masterpieces of the collection itself, especially some Brancusi, and we'll have a word on Brancusi itself. And now we are going back to 1977, and that's why I was a bit confused. My apologies a few minutes ago. Back to the opening of the Centre Pompidou in 1997, on the very first presentation of the permanent collection. So the institution had two separate floors devoted to the permanent collection. And the permanent collection and the general programming of the Centre Pompidou was prepared, conceived by his very first director, Pontus Hulten. and Pontius Sultan was very important for us because he was somehow inhabited or a good representative of that living state and open and conscious generosity that is somehow, I think, our identity. What is also interesting on these views is that you have a way of hanging that is not especially what we could do today, and we will be seeing some evolution on the hanging of the permanent collection itself. Also, an interesting side note is that the Piano, Rogers, and Pontius Sultan together were thinking about different type of presentation that could involve the viewers. So, in meaning that that is considered to be what you see on the screen is called the Artothèque, and that was a very specific way of hanging where you could select some paintings and some works on some hanged walls, and the hangs were directly taken from the sailings and selected by the viewers themselves. And we are thinking about maybe reconceived that type of dispositif. I don't have the specific word in English, in 2030 when we will be reopening the museum. So this is Pontius Sultan, and Pontius Sultan was also very important because he was supporting some of the artists that later on became representative of the openness and the craziness of our collection itself. And in 1977, a few months after the opening of the Centre Pompidou, Niki de Saint-Phal and Jean Tinguely, for example, invented a large installation that was called the Crocodrome de Zig et Puce. You have right there a view of that installation. And that was an installation that was conceived a bit as a roller coaster or as a complete fairy tales where you could get on a train and evolve in something that was both fairy and also a bit, I think, scary, but completely new at that time. And I think that will be quite astonishing even today if it had to be reinstalled, which is impossible. The very first exhibition of 1977 is also a very important name for us and in the collection and in country art as well. And it was L'œuvre de Marcel Duchamp. And I'm saying a few words on Marcel Duchamp because we will be having an exhibition on Marcel Duchamp in a few months at the Grand Palais, which is also one of our main museum in Paris, and the Grand Palais will host part of the permanent collection during the closing. What also were very important in the opening program conceived by Pontius Sultan was that idea of having some conversation, of linking Paris to the rest of the world. And you had this very first exhibition that was Paris, New York, and that later on were followed by different conversations like Paris, Moscow, Paris, Berlin, and a few decades afterwards, we had last year, a few months before our closing, Paris Noir, which was an important exhibition for us, saying and acknowledging the importance of African diasporas and Afro-American diasporas in Paris, making the history of Paris from the end of the Second World till the early 2000s. So what is the Musée National d'Art Moderne? As I told you, it's the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art, but it's not only modern and contemporary art, it's also graphic arts, photography, experimental films, new media, architecture, design, and one of the most ambitious library that we have that is hosting exhibition catalogs, artist books, and some rare prints. So it's considered to be the second largest modern art and country collection in the world, the first one being the one in New York at the MoMA. And it is the very first one in Europe and in France as well. I was speaking about the generosity, which is, I think, part of our institution and the collection identity itself. So this is a graphic which is a bit aggressive, I would say, to look at, but it tells us what is our loan policy. And the loan policy is very, very important for us, meaning that we have shared the collection in France, because being the National Museum of Modern Art is being national in the terms of generosity, in having the collection going to big national museum or to small venues in France, but also having the collection spreading around the world, all around the world, and being shown, being part of a thematic exhibition, and having some of the main founds of the collection themselves moving all around the world. And we'll see that part later on. I wanted also to have a few slides on some recent acquisitions. So these are American artists that entered the collection in 2025. And that can give you an overview of the large representation of American artists in the collection, but also what we looked at and what we try to collect and to fill the gap as well in terms of mediums. So having paintings as well, but also photography with Martha Wilson, some installation by George Herms, or even, and that is quite interesting for us, some NFT and IA works. And I think the Centre Pompidou was the very first institution in the world to collect NFT works, and is one of the most active institution to work also on the EI aspects, having artists working with the EI or thinking about EI, which is, as you know, two different things. And I also wanted to say a word on the American friends of the Centre Pompidou, because the Centre Pompidou has a collection which is composed of 150,000 works today, and is mostly enriched and mostly helped by donation and acquisitions led by the Friends of the Centre Pompidou, and the American Friends of the Centre Pompidou is very active on that part, and I wanted to warn them and to say thank you to all their actions. And this is a view about our very last show that closed in October. And for the very last show, we wanted to have a carte blanche, so an invitation to one artist. And that artist was the German photographer Wolfgang Tillmans. And Wolfgang Tillmans has invested a complete floor. And I think, I've done my research, I think it's the only time where a almost complete floor is invested by an artist. And Tillmans were showing some of his 30 years career of photography, but also showing his complete artist books, some new films, working on the installation of the public library where the exhibition were rooted. And it was a complete tribute to the Centre Pompidou itself, to its spirit and to its openness. And we are now closed, and most the people are thinking, are you closed for 5 years, 10 years? Why are you closed? What are you doing during that time of construction? And this is what we're going to see in the next slides. So before telling you why we are closing, I wanted to compare some plans with the very first sketches and drawings made by Piano. So you can see we already analyzed them, but a quite open institution, and somehow also a bit greenish and more invested in nature institution that it is today. And what is the plans of the institution before the closing a few months ago? And that leads us to really understand the identity, the nature of the Centre Pompidou. Having on the sub level an institution that is hosting films with 2 theaters and also 2 rooms that can host some theater, some representation. Then the forum, the entrance, which is called the Agora as well, and which is an open space with what was the public library and the shop, but which was also hosting some talks, some conferences, some parties as well. On the very first, on the first level and on the second level, we had on the second and third level, my bad, we had the public library, and the fourth and the fifth, we had the National Museum permanent collection. And with this division where the fourth was mostly devoted to contemporary art and the fifth being mostly devoted to modern arts. But that has also changed, especially under the direction of my director, Xavier Rey. And the sixth floor was divided with two temporary exhibition spaces, the one that are hosted the thematic or the monographic exhibition that are very known in our history, and a restaurant with a quite fancy view on Paris. So that is the plans. The plan is quite important to understand because it will change in 5 years. So this is what should be the Centre Pompidou in 2030. So you might think that it hasn't changed, but we will see that even though the disposition of the different places and what was the museum on the fifth and the floors, the temporary exhibitions on the sixth, or even the public library on the third and the second haven't change or will not change in the future, the interior of the space and what will be the place for contemporary production will be completely renewed, and that will be especially the case in the sub-levels of the Centre Pompidou, because we are gaining what was supposed to be a parking lot, as you can see right there in the very first sketches of Piano and Rogers. We are using that parking lot to somehow create new spaces that will be hosting multidisciplinary galleries that will be possibly divided between 3 spaces or 2 spaces or 1 joint spaces to show what is contemporary practices. So not only contemporary art, but also dance, performance. So a quite new and quite, I think, innovative space for us. The cinemas will be also restored, and what will be also new is the forum. We will see that quite later on. So these are the views of the Centre Pompidou in 2030, and it is also important to understand that we are trying to come back at the very first ideas that were supported by Richard Piano and Roger to somehow go back to the roots of the Centre Pompidou as it was first conceived and first thought in even before 1977, meaning that what was only one entrance on the piazza will be separated with different entrances in the building. And what is also very important for us is that we will have more transparency and more opening to one side to the other in the Centre Pompidou. We are also closing for one very important subject, is that the Centre Pompidou was conceived in 1977 with a quite nocive isolant, which is asbestos. I'm never sure of my English pronunciation of asbestos, but the building is full of it, and we have to remove asbestos from every part of the building. And that timing is also a good window for us to somehow rethink the energy consumption that is quite strong today, and we are aiming to reduce the building energy by 60% in 5 years. So let's see in details what will be the new spaces in 5 years. So you remember what was the opening slides in 1977. That should be the Centre Pompidou in 2030 with the Forum and the Agora that is much more open and much more lighty, as you can see. The shop will be also more important, having moved to what was an exhibition space before. And we have also these little seats, these gradins, to host some performance, to host some concerts, to host some representation in the future. This is another view of the Agora. And right below the Agora is the place, the space where which will be devoted to country creation. So the one where we will have one or either two or either three spaces joined together or separated and devoted to what is country performances. Looks like, yes. So another view of the sub-levels. We will have also a space that is called the Pôle Nouvelle Génération, so the new generation space. And that will be a space for, I think, the 7 years old till the 14th, where the kids and teenagers will be able to play, but will be also able to confront themselves with works. And we are thinking about having some works from the museum collection in that specific space. The public library will be also changed with a new design and new seats, new country exhibitions, with also programming that will be thought by the library and the museum teams together. And let's not forget also the public department that will be also joining forces. And I cannot share so much views about the permanent collection that will be installed in the 5th and the 4th floor as they used to be, because we are not that advanced on that specific subject. But what is really important for us is that the workshop, the Atelier Brancusi, the Brancusi workshop that he gave to the French state when he died, will be reinstalled within the building. So maybe some of them might have been to the Atelier Brancusi before, and that was installed in another building on the piazza, made by Renzo Piano. And that building, even though it was very lighty and very beautiful in terms of space, wasn't habited, wasn't the good space to host the most visitors and to give the most audience to Brancusi. And we are thinking about having Brancusi within the museum and within the institution. And I think what will be also quite new is the opening of the Toit Terrasse, so a complete rooftop that will be showing to the audience a new and even more impressive view on Paris, on the roof of the Centre Pompidou, so on the 7th floor. It's actually now a closed space, and it will be transformed to host publics and to host parties as well. So that should be the building in 2030. And during that time of closing, we are closed indeed, but we have many projects and many works, whether they be in France or whether they be in the world. And that general program is called the Constellation, because the idea is to somehow have the Centre Pompidou all over the world, and to have different projects that show our vitality and our generosity. So let's begin with the Grand Palais. The Grand Palais will be showing us some of our main artists of the collection in two spaces. And we will be opening next March a Matisse exhibition on his very late years. Then in Paris, we recently closed Kandinsky and la Musique at the Philharmonie de Paris. We will be having some exhibition in a national museum or even historic places like the Panthéon. Some of them might know the Panthéon. The Panthéon is the place for great people hosting historic figures or writers and artists, as well as resistance. And that exhibition that will be opening next September will be on the idea of small life compared to the great lives of that figures. I already said a word about Marcel Duchamp, and Marcel Duchamp is also the name of a prize that is given for the 25 past years, sorry, on country practices. Everywhere in France in 2026, we will have a program about the death of the famous American Alexander Calder. Another great exhibition is a retrospective of François Morellet in Metz. François Morellet is the artist I told you about, who joined his forces to think about the colors of the Centre Pompidou. We will have many exhibitions and respecting this idea, having the collection of the museum being spread all over France, but not only over France, but also in the world. We are working in Europe, in Madrid, in Barcelona. We are having our Brancusi retrospective, traveling to Berlin and opening next month. Some of the design collection is traveling to Brussels, and we also participated in the opening of a new museum in Alula in Saudi Arabia, with the very first exhibition made from the collection of the Centre Pompidou, and the exhibition itself is called Orland. The Centre Pompidou is not only providing international exhibition and having its permanent collection traveling to other institutions. We have also 4 different institutions that are labeled as the Centre Pompidou. 2 are open 5 years ago. The first one being the Centre Pompidou Malaga in Spain, and the other one being the West Bund Museum in Shanghai. And this year, in 2026, will be really important for us because we will be opening the Centre Pompidou Anwa in Seoul in May, and a new Centre Pompidou in Brussels in Canal. And that is also very important for us to somehow show different parts of the collection, to spread this idea of multidisciplinary centers, and to have a presence mostly all over the world. And to end this presentation, I want to say a few words on what will be quite a revolution for us, and that is the opening of the Centre Pompidou Francilien. So to the people that are speaking French, Francilien is the adjective for Île-de-France, meaning that we are opening a Centre Pompidou not that far from Paris, 25 kilometers away from the center of Paris, that will be both a place for conservation and restoration of our world collection, or almost world collection, will be in that new building, but also a place for cultural events, having exhibitions, having dance, performance, and screening, just as the Centre Pompidou is. So these are the views of the Centre Pompidou Francilien. The building is currently being built, and what is also very rare is that in France, it's that the timing of the construction is respected, and it will be opening its very first program in October and opening its doors and with first permanent collection in 1 year, in February 2027. So the building is rooted in Massy, in the southern west suburbs of Paris, only 25 to 30 minutes by subways. And what you can see is that there are some obviously some similarities with the Centre Pompidou itself, especially the framing and the lift that is now transformed into a wooden stairs to go up to the platform of the Centre Pompidou Francilien. The dimensions are also quite equal, at least in terms of width. And what will be really important for us is having this conservation center that is lacking today. And we will have some labs to analyze the works, to somehow photograph them correctly, to stores to stores the 3D installation, just as the little small prints in the very and the best, I guess, modern conditions that we're hoping for this collection to be preserved for eternity. And we will be showing the collection itself in its exhibition spaces. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope my English wasn't too hectic, and I was very, very proud to speak about these coming years, and that will be important for us.
Bravo, Arthur. That was quite a tour d'horizon and a tour de force. We all knew that the Centre Pompidou had closed, but we had no idea, first of all, what was going to replace the existing interior of that structure, but nor did we have any idea about just how vast the ambitions are for the next 5 years, both in terms of all of these shows around the country, around Europe, around the world. And then to finish up with the Centre Pompidou Francilien, which is the same size
Yeah.
as Beaubourg. I mean,
Almost the same size, yes. But it is very important for you all to understand that why we are close, we are preparing our future, and that is in terms of architecture here, because the building by Piano and Rogers will be registered as a monument historique, as a historical monument, which isn't the case, and which will be a premiere, I think, for a building that has only 15 years old and where an architect is still living with Renzo Piano, and in the same time having these conservative, in a good way, dynamic or movement is having its transformation within, and that is the very first idea of Piano and Rogers, because when they conceived the building, it was conceived to be an institution that was transforming itself every 25 to 30 years. So I think we are at that time where we need to somehow think about our future, but coming back to the Piano and Rogers very first vision.
So we, among other questions, we've got a fan of Georges, the rooftop restaurant.
Oh, yes.
Qu'est-ce qui se passe? What happens to the rooftop restaurant?
So the restaurant will be there in 2030. We don't know if it will be the George itself or another restaurant. This will be debated in time, but the space and the restaurant itself won't be changing. There will be a restaurant, a high quality restaurants there in 5 years.
Okay, well, that's reassuring, and I mean, it's one of the
I agree.
all-time phenomenal views in Paris, and it
Mm.
sounds like with the addition of this terrace, it's only going to get better.
Yes.
And
Except when we have these very awful weather, just like today's.
Well, then you go inside.
Yes.
So you mentioned, and this, would you please clarify? So you mentioned that the Centre Pompidou incorporated or basically took over the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, which had been, okay, could you, because there's still a Musée d'Art Moderne at Palais de
Yes.
Tokyo.
So
What
yeah.
happened?
Yeah, these are really two different institutions. The Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris is hosting the collection, which is modern art and which is contemporary art, by the city of Paris. So it is a city collection, and we have inherited from a national collection, which was the Musée des Écoles d'étrangères, and which was later on, which was the very first basis of the very first grounds of the what became the Musée National d'Art Moderne. So there are two different entities, but that somehow crossed their roads at the Palais de Tokyo. I don't know specifically the history of the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, and I don't remember when they settled at the Palais de Tokyo. I guess probably after or lived, but we somehow share this history with the Palais de Tokyo. But the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris and the Musée National d'Art Moderne are two completely different entities and two different history of collections.
Okay. Très bien. And so at the end of your presentation, you mentioned that there are these four museums, institutions around the world that are branded Centre Pompidou, Malaga, Shanghai, and Seoul and Brussels. Are these going to be permanent institutions or temporary?
So we have with most of them we have a partnership on the collection, on making exhibitions, on thinking a public program that is framed for 5 to 10 years, and that is renegotiated every at the end of every contract.
Okay.
And some of them have also independent teams, independent curatorial teams, and like Canal is making also exhibition which are not made by the Centre Pompidou, and some of them are entirely giving their spaces to our curators and opening their walls to our permanent collections.
Okay.
So what I am trying to say, and maybe not correctly, is that every project in our international constellation is quite special and unique in each way.
Got it. And another thing which you drew our attention to, which perhaps was not well known, is the fact that the Centre Pompidou is more of a centre culturel dans le sens plus large than purely an art museum. And
Yes.
you listed cinemas, library, performance space, and so on. And that's true that when you go there, many times people go to see the temporary exhibition, and so they go directly up to the fifth floor to see the temporary exhibitions, which are extraordinary, but don't realize how much else is out there too. You mentioned BPI, that stands for what?
BPI stands for the Bibliothèque Publique d'Information, so the Public Information Library. And
And
this is the second largest public library in, I'm not sure in France, but in Paris. The first one being the National Library, the BNF. But it is true that when you somehow cross
Hey.
into a friend around, and they might say, "I've been to the Centre Pompidou," or "I've been to the," some of them say, "I've been to the MNAM, the Musée National d'Art Moderne," or "I've been to Beaubourg," or "I've been to the Centre Beaubourg," and the institution itself have different names and different labels, and it somehow encapsulates the very pluridisciplinary aspect of our institution, because we are showing a permanent collection, we are showing temporary exhibitions, but we are also having some theaters, some dance projects, some conferences. That is very common today to have that kind of openness and open institution, but in 1977 I think it was one of the very first one, and that has somehow traces a path for other institutions in the world.
Okay. So you drew our attention to the Brancusi studio and the fact that it might be brought inside the museum in the next iteration. What
Yes.
is it? Can it be viewed in the next 5 years? Will it be on display somewhere separate?
So we maybe I've been too quick on that presentation, but we will be having a Brancusi exhibition in the world. And about the studio itself, I'm not sure because it is quite complicated to move all the workshop, having the works, but also the gear, the sketches, the spirit of the Brancusi workshop. But we will be showing Brancusi works as he's one of our main um, uh, pieces, main artists in the collections abroad, indeed.
Okay, so you'll disperse the art, loan the art in your generous policy, but the studio itself will probably be in storage.
Yes, no, the studio itself is mostly a spirit, if we could say so, but we won't be showing the studio in its old form abroad.
Okay, okay. Très bien. And archives. So will the archives be available somewhere else during this 5-year period?
So the archives of the Centre Pompidou are quite a subject because we have different kind of archive. We have the museum archives, we have the institutional and architectural archives. We have the archive of the two different libraries. So some of them will be moved to the Centre Pompidou Francilien in Massy, meaning being the archive of the museum. Some of them are already being open and can be reviewed as the continuation of the mission of the BPI, because the BPI has settled in a new building in 13th arrondissement of Paris for the closing time. The building itself is called Lumière. And about the institutional archive, they are mostly requested by historians, and I have to say that I don't know if they will be open or not to the research during that closing time.
Okay.
My apologies.
Well, quite all right. So you also mentioned at the beginning that the first exhibition featured, or the very early exhibition included works by Niki de Saint-Phal and Jean Tinguely. Did they have, is there a connection between the museum and the fountain, Stravinsky fountain next door, featuring the works of both of those artists?
So there is indeed a connection because, as you know, Pontus Sultan supported mostly Nikit Saint-Phal and Jean Tinguely during their lifetime, and he supported some installation in Switzerland, in Milly-la-Forêt, in the suburbs of Paris, in the forest, and he supported also this installation. But that specific installation was chosen by the city of Paris to be closed to the Centre Pompidou, but is not part of the Centre Pompidou collection itself. So we have indeed played a role during the time of renovation and reconstruction of the fontaine, but the fontaine is owned by the city of Paris.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And I would just repeat what you said earlier, because even though the Centre Pompidou itself will be closed for 5 years, the building, it's quite remarkable, the constellation just within Paris, where you can see parts of the collection. You mentioned the Grand Palais and other sites as the iconic sites, Philharmonie, BNF, Panthéon, uh, and who knows where else. So I guess we can keep informed by consulting the website.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, we have a specific page on the website that is called the Constellation, where you can see almost everywhere in the world where we are settling and where we are doing projects and partnerships and exhibitions and also public programs. So the constellation is indeed well on the website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, which perfectly illustrated the theme of this series of lectures, which is that no institution, none of our museums in Paris or anywhere else, frankly, is static. They're always making and being remade, and there's perhaps no better example of that than the Centre Pompidou. So, merci et bon courage.
Thank you to all, and I hope my English was clear. And
Your-
thank you for listening to me.
Your English was perfect. Merci beaucoup.
Wonderful. And we'll see you in 2030 as well, 2030 when we'll be reopening.
Very soon. And I will pass the word to Patricia Bonat.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, Russell. That was quite a remarkable journey you took us on. And as the Centre Pompidou, it was rather futuristic too. So this was great to conclude, sadly, but to conclude our 2026 series of History and Heritage of France that was dedicated to the museum this year. And who knows where next year will take us on. So until then, I will say à bientôt et à l'année prochaine.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.